Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. Again, Tuesday, May 12th, 2026 at 2:05 in the afternoon. We're back from a short break and we have Ari Fishman with us. Mr. Fishman, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks
So
for
if you could state your name and your affiliation and continue on with your testimony.
my name's Ari Fishman, from Waterbury, owner of Zen Barn, and giving an example of we were victims of fraud with one of these kiosks. It was definitely put our business in a very hard position, and it was an interesting fraud, I think, because it played on an employee that wasn't older, someone you would think is in the demographic of knowing better, management level, educated, guessing their age was, probably 40s, late 30s, late 40s, sometime in that range. And then basically I can run down what happened. They played on, the scam was, somewhat sophisticated, I guess. And then I think also just some ways it worked out between communication with employees worked in the scammer's benefit to make it more believable, and made me really see how these things can get carried away. There was a phone call to our front desk saying, hey, this is a purveyor for our business. We need to do a delivery at 7, but we haven't got the money yet. I'm here with the owner. And the owner, and someone said, hey, it's me. It was my brother, posing as my brother, to the front desk person. We got to get this guy paid so they can do this delivery. I'm in a bad service area. I'm going to call you from WhatsApp. So then that communication was then relayed to the manager. Hey, Noah's calling you something urgent. He's going to call you on WhatsApp. So I think that barrier of maybe if the manager got the original call, they would have said, oh, this is weird. WhatsApp, what's going on? But that it came from another employee that sort of had already maybe verified that to them. Oh, look, I know this is Noah. Granted, it was a new employee, but still. So anyways, they start communicating through WhatsApp. There was a picture that was just, stolen from social media, but made it look like a more legitimate account. And started communicating, hey, we just got to get this person this money. And then there was a whole bunch of back and forth, and then started creating sort of the urgency and getting the person worked up. And to the point where they emptied our safe, took all the cash, drove to the crypto kiosk, and sat there after hours at 7 or 8 at night, feeding $6,000 bill by bill into a crypto machine, to never be seen again. And the person was, very upset afterwards. We were very understanding, but they were so upset, within a week, they ended up resigning their job, went on later to kind of disparage us because they were so upset about how they felt about that situation, that they were put in that position. So it had fallout beyond just the money. So that was sort of the gist of it. And, when you went back and broke it down, we're talking to that employee, they were like, yeah, wow, I can't believe I fell for that. I can't believe I never just called you guys on the phone, and asked, is this really you? Or called, the brother or another employee to like get any sort of verification. But the way they built up the sort of urgency and getting the blood pressure and the emotions involved, so people aren't thinking clearly. In hindsight, the employee was just couldn't believe that they actually fell for that. At one point, the person posing as us, as the owner, was swearing at them and in a way that we would never talk to them, but they were so emotionally distraught at that point that it just added to that situation. And just, just kind of hard to imagine someone driving an hour out of the way at 8 at night to a vape shop and piling money into this like random machine, but it happened.
So you went through that. Questions for Mr. Fishman? Tony?
First of all, thank you very much for coming forward. I know how hard this can be sometimes when you're dealing with situations like that. Now, you're a Vermont company?
Yes.
And where did you go? Where did your employee go for the crypto?
This was in Williston.
Okay.
Not sure the exact place. We contacted them afterwards and they were just kind of like, not our problem. And that was the end of it.
So you attempted to contact the cryptocurrency operator and they told you it was not their problem.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
They just sort of made it sound like it was that thing sits in our place.
It was the business.
So it was a business. Did you reach out to the cryptocurrency operator, not the business, but the people who put the machine in there?
No, I just sort of felt like there was, I have crypto. We looked into it a bit. It didn't seem like there was any recourse for us.
Did you touch base with law enforcement at all?
I believe so. I believe we did. And I think they just said, yeah, sorry, not, we must have, because it was a significant amount of money and we would have liked to recoup it, but it didn't. We explored every avenue we thought we could. And there wasn't, when we tried insurance, there just wasn't a whole lot. They're like, hey, you did it. They had access to the money. They put it in, nothing we can do at this point.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much. I think Representative asked you about, do you actually contact the operator of the kiosk? And I think you said something, you were left with the impression that there was nothing you could do. Did you ever ask for a refund or anything like that?
Yeah, it was the first I'd ever heard of these.
Yeah.
And, we contacted the store and they just gave us they didn't help us at all. The guy just kind of said, tough luck. I had nothing I can do. And we were trying to get our money back. We did contact the police. We contacted our insurance. We thought there might be some avenue to recoup something. And after it pretty quickly felt like there wasn't an avenue.
Thanks very much. Thanks for coming to talk to us.
Any other questions for Mr. Fishman? How long ago was that?
That was 2003, 23, October of 23.
3 years ago.
So yeah, if there ever is some refund thing, definitely let me know.
Sure. Anything else? Great. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon. We appreciate it.
All right. Yeah, no problem.
Anyone else want to speak to us? Ethan?
Thank you. Ethan McLaughlin from DFR. Just wanted to respond to a couple of things that were said today and and give you an opportunity to ask us any questions that you might have. I guess the first thing that I just wanted to point out, there have been several bills around the country enacted that include provisions that are somewhat similar to what's in the Vermont bill. I did want to make sure that you were aware that certainly since our bill was enacted, and I think all in 2026, 6 states have moved toward outright bans The states are Indiana, Tennessee, and Minnesota, which I think Aaron might have mentioned last week. Minnesota is an interesting one because they had some similar protections to what Vermont had. They had a transaction limit, daily transaction limit, and they did have a refund provision, although much less expansive than ours. But they had a lot more machines in their state, and they had a lot of folks testify about there still being a lot of fraud in the state, and that's how they made their decision. I don't believe that Tennessee or Indiana, had any sort of comprehensive regulation in place with respect to kiosks before enacting their bans this year. So that is one change when you were considering the bill last year. No states had moved to enact bans. They're just states considering that. One thing we do know about the frauds that are sort of where the victims are tricked into using these machines to these fraudulently induced transactions, is that we know reporting rates are low. Consumers are often embarrassed. Not all of the frauds involve huge amounts of money, right? Like the Easy Pass fraud text you probably get weekly. That's not a $20,000 fraud, but there are a lot of those. And certainly does happen. And there are a lot of frauds that extend over long periods of time. Unfortunately, investment frauds are one of those sorts, right? They often start with a romance scam where they develop some sort of relationship, and then there's some investing in a product over a long period of time. And those tend to have the highest losses, and they go on a really long time because customers think they're making a lot of money. They think they've made the investment of their life, and they're just moving more and more of their savings over to it, typically, very, very gradually, but they don't find out about it until there's some catalyst that causes them to withdraw. And then they say, well, in order to withdraw, you've got to pay, an extra 10,000 of taxes or something like that. So there can be a long tail on when these things get reported. And there's a lot of inconsistency in terms of how they get reported to who and what gets disclosed. You heard the owner of the business, didn't necessarily occur to him that the person to contact would be the operator of the kiosk. He's contacting the owner of the store, contacting local police, but it's not always coming through to folks that are fully can inform them about their remedies and help them. And I think we knew that was a limitation of the statute last year when it was being considered. But I don't think it's certainly not our belief that no illicit or fraudulently induced transactions are happening, or that our statute is so effective that it's eliminated 100% of them. So in some ways, it's disappointing to hear that there haven't been more things that have come up. And I see if I had anything else I want to mention based on our discussions. I think that covers it. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for Ethan?
On the states that banned the kiosks, was it an immediate ban, do you know when those bans went into effect? Was there a time period? How did that, do you know how that worked?
I believe they had immediate effect. I don't know I can't say that with absolute certainty. I know in Minnesota, there were some provisions to make sure that, customers that had money sort of where the kiosk was holding custody of customer money, that they'd still be able to get that money back. I don't think that's an issue in Vermont because I don't believe CoinFlip holds custody of customer funds, but Mr. Lipka could confirm that for you.
I'm just wondering if there's something, if we do move forward with a ban, I'm curious if there's a step that we might need to do in the process, and I just don't want to miss that. So that's
I think anything that we thought would have been necessary would have been in the legislation, which we drafted at your request, not as a DFR proposal.
Yeah, it's just one part of the text of so you drafted it at page 16, it has a provision saying that for transactions occurring after July 1 in violation of this section, the operator should provide full refund to the customer. So I guess I have two questions. Is that a full refund for the customer if they notify within 90 days? Or is it more than that?
We had sort of a funny situation here, and I'll tell you what we're trying to address with that
And it has
paragraph.
to do with the effective date kind of thing.
Just that it has the ban going into effect. We couldn't get rid of all the existing language, right? Because if a customer was fraudulently induced into a scam transaction the day before the ban, you would still want them to have their 90 days to report it and to get their refund. And then we realized we were in this sort of funny situation, right? Where if they kept the machine on the next day, well, our thing that entitled them to that refund, had sort of stopped. It was only, applying to things before the ban. So didn't think we should ever be in a situation where if someone was violating the ban, that they would be in a better position than, a kiosk that was operating legally, before the ban went into effect. So I think what we ended up saying is that if you violate the ban, you're still going to be subject to all the administrative penalties and all the other things under Vermont law. But, you have to give a full refund. It's not time limited. And I think the general requirements of that are less restrictive. I think, I believe the commissioner can order it. I don't have the language in front of me, but the thing there was that if the legislature decides to enact a ban, it shouldn't result in a situation where customers have less protection if someone violates the ban. So we made it so that they would have more protection, right? It's just if you violate this ban and someone uses it and they get scammed, they have full refund rights.
Yeah, I see. So I get it. So if a transaction occurs after the ban, July 1 to the 26th, that's what charging. It's not just violation of the section, it's in violation of the provision of the new law that banned.
Yeah, in violation of the ban. So it might not even have a requirement that it be fraudulently induced. It
But
might be
it doesn't.
they're entitled to a
It
full
doesn't-
refund if they violate the ban and they're operating a kiosk in Vermont.
Full refund, no question.
Yeah. So that is a provision that we would hope would never come into effect because so sorry, I've gotten a little more information on the bans. The Indiana ban was immediate. Tennessee ban goes into effect July 1 and in Minnesota August 1. So there was a delay on that. Thank you, Joe.
Immediate seems interesting. Immediate seems like there was an emergency or something like that. It's in the middle of the legislative session.
I don't, immediate upon it, yeah, being passed into law. They're required to,
The runway to wind down. Questions for Ethan? Great, Ethan, thank you. So. Committee starts, discussion. I think we should discuss the kiosk fees first before we decide on whether or not we agree with first the Senate proposal of amendment, and then because that'll have a bearing on what we do. So there's two proposals. There's the Senate proposal of amendment, which is to extend the moratorium for one more year. There's also a proposal in 1.3 that would ban the kiosk in Vermont. So discussions, thoughts? Or
I'm open. I've never been a fan of these, the way these transactions work. I think they're ripe for people who want to scam people out of their money. Makes it just really easy. I think we did as much as we thought we could last year. I was never convinced that was enough really to protect consumers who get themselves in situations like Mr. Fishman and maybe some other people. And I'm trying to think of ways you could make it better. I floated the idea of absolute liability. That might have some issues too. I guess I'm comfortable with, of the two choices, rather than just trying to amend it to make it stronger, I don't, as Mr. Curtis said, I don't think the benefits for the public outweigh the risk.
You talk louder so that people over there can hear you too.
What? What I was saying was that I'm not a big fan of these transactions. I think they impose just the nature of it and how quickly it can all work. I think it exposes consumers to a lot of risk. I think there are, so I agree with Mr. Curtis that I don't think the benefits outweigh the risks. I wasn't a big fan of these kinds of transactions last year. And nothing that I've seen really have changed my mind on that. So I'd certainly, it's kind of like reconsideration time, and upon reconsideration, I just soon ban.
Jonathan?
I don't see a reason. I don't agree with that. And I think that it's important to hear the testimony that what happened when things go wrong, they go very wrong. The testimony we heard about, like there was one issue and they caught it. It strikes me as indicating that the guardrails matter. They can make a difference. And so I don't have a major, I don't see myself particularly utilizing that service, but I also don't see myself needing to eradicate it from the state. So I don't really know why people like it, but some people like it. And I haven't seen I was really alarmed by this stuff last year. I'm really glad to hear that that of the transactions that took place in Vermont, the one example I think of where someone was like, I'm going to call and talk to them is like, they had held the transaction. It just went right back to the consumer, which I think is consumer protection. That's how it feels. That's what it seems like to me. And I'd like to protect consumers and not make too many choices for them.
I come down on the side of Jonathan. I think all this stuff is just like my VCR. I depend on my kids to help me navigate through it. But I think we've had these protections only in place for 10 and a half months. It sounds like they're working. And if we do ban it, the scammers are still going to adjust and adapt and find other avenues that are not protected. And if we can stop some of these by having what seems to be somewhat robust protections in place, that seems to me to be a good thing. So I think we ought to at least give it another year and see what the numbers show up. I think all the data that we're getting reports on are like 2024 and earlier. So I'm not sure it's been a true test of the protections we have.
So I was already ban these things with that report from Zenbar, but then I found out it was 2023 before we had these policies in effect. So I'm still struggling with this very much. I believe that that businesses should be able to do business any way they choose, as long as it doesn't hurt the consumer. But the question is this hurting the consumer? And, I think about that situation there, and what if they knew that they could get a refund? Would that have made a difference? Then he would have gotten his money back and things like that. So I don't know. I'm still struggling. I guess I need to hear from some of the other people here. I'm very much on the fence with this. The other side of this is that I do have a hard time buying. I think about, I know, Monique and I talk a lot about privacy and privacy hawks and things like that, and I understand that around a crypto wallet, but if you're having to flash a QR code in order to access that wallet, you're having to use technology and you're having to be connected to the internet. So I have a hard time, reconciling that in my mind. The other thing that bothers me is we know that a large percentage of these things go unreported. I've mentioned, I have a relative myself who was a victim of a romance scam. And I was given, there's a significant relative of mine, and I was given very strict orders not to tell anyone because they were so embarrassed by that they had been had. So I'm still weighing those things out. So please, others, continue.
So what I heard from the Zen Barn, right, is that they reached out to 2 different people to report it, and neither of those avenues would have gotten information to us. So they did not reach out to CAP, they did not reach out to DFR, they did not reach out to the crypto provider, the unit provider. And so we in this room would never know about that. And how many other of those situations are we never going to hear about because the information just isn't going to one place? And so we are getting reports from a person with a vested interest in keeping the kiosk here on what has been reported to that person or that company, which may or may not be the real picture. Not saying they're not telling the truth. I'm saying they may not even have had those reports to them. And so this is so murky. It doesn't feel good to have murky businesses legal in our state. And that's my difficulty with this.
And just to add, I am in no way questioning the data that we received. I
Correct.
believe that data is accurate and real.
Correct.
Kind of with Tony and Edie, I guess. I guess I'm leaning more towards ban because of lack of data and how again, like respecting the testimony we got, but feeling like there is so much unreported stuff. I was just saying when we were on break that like I don't know how many scam texts and things and phishing stuff that I'm getting all the time that I'm not reporting because I'm like I'm not going to take the time, and like so even if I did, and I have fallen for stuff way back before we started doing data privacy stuff. And and also just like like my personal experience with crypto wallets and things like that is like it is very technical, and then it's like it's also attached to it's been attached to my bank account, and like I move that money if I've needed to. Like don't believe me, I don't like a tiny bit amount, so I'm playing around with it, but like to experiment with it, and that feels like normally how I'm using. Like I think I would much rather be for myself. It feels less risky to be tying it to I guess the trusted sources that I have with my relationship with my bank, and somebody else is like watching that and stuff like that. And it does feel like there's this like gray area of like, yeah, the Zenbarn not knowing who to report to, not the owner that has the kiosk in there, not knowing what the protocol was concerning. That I like am just so doubtful that people are actually reaching out to the AG. That yeah, it just seems like there's more risk there than benefits.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see what a coin flip receipt looks like. Does it say what to do? Does it give you I mean, like, what is it telling you? It's too late to look at what the receipt was from 2023. I do wonder in some ways if the things we're doing, one of the challenging things is knowing, okay, if you're doing it well, what feedback are you going to get that you're doing anything at all? Like, how will you find out? And I think that's something that we struggle with in a lot of different ways in the realm of policymaking. Like, how do you know you're doing a good job? Or is that evidence that something's going well? Or is it evidence that no one's telling you about the things that are not going well? And a lot of the choice that we make about that interpretation, I think, maybe is what we bring to that, is the eyes we bring to that visual. I wonder if there's things that we can do about that. So people, what is the protocol? And if this seems like a good time to jump on that if we want to, because there's just two. So, now, I mean, it was interesting to look at some of this stuff where there were over 900, I think, in Indiana. I mean, it's like, oh, there were a ton of them. And the horse is out of the barn. What can we do? All right, there's two here. Maybe this is a good time to shorten that, to have a procedure that does mean that any entity that's hosting one, the person on staff has to know to say something. I mean, I'm not really sure what the deal is, but maybe there are some things we can think about, because we're kind of all the way down to the ground floor of that proliferation within the state. I don't recall what the number of kiosks was prior to the moratorium or prior to the tightening of the legislative situation. Was it in the dozens? Was it, if anyone in the room knows how many kiosks there were in Vermont?
Joe, do you remember?
Okay.
I remember the exact number, but I believe it was over 70.
Oh, okay. So it was a lot big, many more than we have now. Okay.
Substantially more.
I do have a copy of the receipt. I just asked the team to send it to me if you'd like to look at it. It does tell you that to report our fraudulently induced transaction, call us at this number, or email us support. So also report a fraudulently induced transaction to the FBI's IC3 Complaint Center. For victims of fraud, can contact the Vermont Attorney General's Assistance Program hotline. So we're telling them on the receipt to call us, to call the FBI, to call the AG's office. So it's very hard to understand that the facts are the facts, right? We're telling them to call us and telling us to call these people. So we're telling them what to do. In 2023, that wasn't happening.
Mr. Lippert, can you confirm that that's what their receipt said throughout the period since the law was passed?
I think so. I asked for a copy of the receipt and I got it in 5 seconds, so I can definitely check. It did not say that before the law went into effect because we did not have the paper receipt required, but now it's paper and text message.
I think I'm also on the fence here a bit. I think like Tony said, I am hesitant to, cut off a business's ability to do business and a consumer's ability to kind of conduct themselves as they need to as a grown person. But I also am very concerned about the potential for underreporting. I think although we can, like, instructions are on the receipt, and that doesn't necessarily dictate that people are going to act rationally within their shame if they are feeling deep shame around their finances. So I do feel really very concerned about that. I am also curious though, because we only have about 10 months of data, if it makes sense to have another year to kind of get a better sense. But even with that, are we still gonna run into an underreporting situation?
I mean, certainly, I think at very minimum, the continuing moratorium, but I keep coming back to this, which is that, even Bill Gates in 2025 talked about how cryptocurrency requires a certain amount of sophisticated knowledge and thinking in order to really do that system in a safe, effective way. And then what we're providing with crypto kiosks are easy access, doesn't require any sophistication to operate except for to put your money in. And so it seems to me like it's a tool for the people who don't have the sophistication to use the tool, which is why it's a perfect scam device. And so, I mean, I could live with a more extended moratorium. I could do that.
Can I just, maybe this can help us as a committee. Let's say for the sake of argument, we were to put another 1 year moratorium. Is there a path to yes? I mean, what are we going to do in 2027? Are we going to kick it down the hill, get down the road another year? What are we expecting? If you say we do put that moratorium, what are we expecting? Is more data really going to help us make the decision? And on the other side, if we do put a ban on, sorry, we can always repeal that at any time. We're here 5 months out of the year.
More data would allow us, I think, to see if, and I don't know when we get over when are we cool with what we know, but it does feel like, because people adapt to scammers adapt. So are the safeguards that maybe seem to have a really good return right away, then it's like you come up with a name with your password, and then you add a couple years later, you got to add in a special character. A couple years after that, you need to add in, and so the thought is like maybe we'd see some natural motion in efficacy. And we need to respond in some way, but it does. I am, I don't know. I can imagine that if with something that's just 10 months, as Representative Karis Duncan has pointed out, we may feel more confidence or comfort, but it is going to be, it's going to feel a little funny if we have, I think the moratorium extension makes some sense. It's also the case that if we just have 2 in the state, if you don't live near it, you're probably not doing too much with it. And so it's not like something that we're going to become acclimatized to, because that's not going to be a part of my circuit living in Pownell. If there's one in Brattleboro and there's one in Essex Junction.
I was in Essex and I was probably going to visit it.
The idea being that the saturation doesn't take place where you see them around. So, which also creates a level of comfort, at least in this way, we won't be overwhelmed by that.
I think the only way you're really going to get the data that you really want to better understand is that you don't have a moratorium on it. You have more machines coming into the state, which will give you information you're looking for, right?
Yeah, I mean, I
No,
think
no,
that's, I mean, I think that's also the other side of the system adapting too. It's like, you know, if operators learn to adapt to our rules, then do we see them rolling out and proliferating?
with consumer protection
Yeah,
that we
like,
think
it
is
is
helpful.
helping, but we also know that it doesn't necessarily go as far as it. Or not to.
I mean, the Rep Olson, your perspective on the what was the term for like the liability, like a very long period of time in which one could receive a refund?
I call it absolute liability.
Absolutely.
So it's
Yeah.
just liability without a lot of the limitations that are in grant.
I mean, it does seem like digitization leads us to think in those very long tail kind of timeframes. It does. I mean, I feel like there's not a lot of durable goods purchases that one could hold under that sort of.
Actually, there are.
Tell me more.
Yeah, no, there's certain, oh, gosh. I'm struggling to come up, but there are certain devices or appliances or whatever that, someone help me, and I'm losing it. But there are certain products where the law says the consumer really isn't going to be able to, even with disclosure, whatever, they're not really going to be able to make that determination as to whether to buy it, whether it's, what the risk is. And so they pose absolute liability on the producer of the good.
The
And I'm
producer,
struggling to come up with a.
and the challenge is again the producer of the good or the I don't even know how to think about the role of a kiosk. Is that the good or is that the
Well, it's a service.
medium?
Yeah, it's a service, but I think you go to absolute liability when the producer of the product or the provider of the service is really the only person who has enough information, potentially information, and the ability to make a difference,
Maybe.
as opposed to the consumer.
I mean, I think of like a car seat.
Yeah, I was thinking
All
of
right,
maybe formula.
Thank you. I know there are
Car
certain,
seats.
certain types of products where the consumer isn't going to be able to figure that out. And also you factor in, I think, the magnitude of harm that might occur. Plus, the producer has the ability. And that's a good question. I mean, I think we heard testimony last year that when I raised that issue, that the operators maybe didn't have as much knowledge about investigating, knowing in real time what the scammers were. But I think we also heard that, and I think we wrote into the law that they were going to be required to hire somebody independent to try to suss that out a little bit, so that they would be able, at least to a great extent that they are now, to identify potential, scams. But I think that kind of underscores where I'm coming from, that they're probably the only ones who can really do that. I don't know enough about the technology to know how they would do that, Tony, but.
Well, and this is part of the problem. So that's really it's like an arms race.
Yeah.
We are constantly trying to outsmart the hackers, and every month they come up with something new. So I think it's a very big ask, if not impossible, to think that even cybersecurity companies struggle with this.
Yeah, I get what you mean. And I think that was some of the testimony last year too, that the notion of putting the entire liability on the kiosk operator probably wasn't feasible, which is then why I go to the next step was, well, if they can't do anything about it, is this really a mechanism that we want to? So I want to do. Want a motion?
I mean, I guess to Tony's point, if we do ban them, we can always repeal the ban.
But if we extend the moratorium, we can gather more data.
Which is
The problem is, kiosks, how much more data are you gonna actually get?
Yep, a valid point.
Point that I think I made is that you really want data, really understand what it's doing, how it works in Vermont, is to have to take moratorium off and allow more kiosks in the state to see how the regulation works, or if it doesn't. You want, is that something that you want to gamble with? I guess.
Or you trust national data, right? Or you look at the states that don't have regulation and you look at what's happening there, and we have all kinds of data on that and how that is not working.
I agree.
So,
Also a very valid point.
right.
I mean, that is not working, and I would be, to what extent is what the operator within the state doing now? To what extent are their protocols because of the existing legislation within the state? The closer it gets to that, the closer that alignment is, then the more we can have some assurance that if there were to be the removal of a moratorium, we would see a replication of that DNA, you might say, as opposed to other approaches. And that would be instill some confidence in my end. I mean, I think there'd be less if the entities that left of the 75 other kiosks, not all of them would want to come back, I don't think, unless they feel like reaching an elevated threshold. Do I have that right? That the legislation is a little more particular now than it was when they left the state? So I don't know if all of them would want to come back, but it's like,
Can we do like a Ferrari ban? Just asking.
here we go. I don't feel prepared to remove a moratorium today. My preference is to extend it by a year and to then revisit this, admittedly not a perfect amount, but as soon as there's many more entities operating in here, we'll have many more individuals talking to us about it, and it might get even harder to filter out the noise. We have a limited amount right now because we have a limited presence in the state, which
Have a moratorium, so can't let any more in.
I am, yes, that's right. And so, I mean, I do feel like I guess what we did last year hasn't had enough time for me to feel comfortable removing the moratorium. I don't know why I'm being gun shy about it, but that's just my nature. I'm not really ready to pull the cap off. But I could be convinced if other people wanted to give it a whirl.
I just go back to where we started this conversation, which is when people want to buy crypto, they have many options. And the kiosks are an option that are much more often used for either illicit or fraud and then other ways. And that is data that we have seen from not from our data, but national data. I reread the report from DFR. I didn't love what I read. I don't see how it benefits Vermonters or Vermont businesses. And that's the piece where we're not comfortable. I don't see the benefit. So that's really where I'm weighing here, right? So.
What is an example of, what are some industries that we have banned in Vermont in the last, since 2005?
Payday loans.
Payday loans
Payday loans.
not banned, it's
It's
regulated.
regulated out of existence too.
I'm just wondering, where have we gone so far as the ban? That's what I really want to know. That feels like a very big step. And I'm just curious what else we've done that to.
Well, and this is the conversation we had a couple of years ago. I don't remember if it was this exact makeup of a committee or not, where no one else had banned it, but 3 states have now banned these because they
Yeah.
don't see the value. It was us in Connecticut, I think at that time, who were putting regulations in place. It's somebody else who can tell you the things that we've banned here.
This is going backwards. And it wasn't a ban per se, but it's hard to imagine that thinking about health insurance and going back to the 90s. And it used to be that health insurance companies would accept the policy or deny a policy for really any reason or no reason at all. And then if they accepted they could charge you whatever they wanted to. There was none of the sort of banding that we think about now, guaranteed issue kind of stuff. And when those laws went into effect, there were some companies whose business model just didn't, and they were effectively banned. And I think the reasoning was they were bottom. But I think the sort of construct was that these products were so harmful to the general public that even at the cost of really sort of banning the business model, it was better for society as a whole. That's going back for it.
I will also go out on a limb and say that billboards.
Billboards. Yeah.
Have that thing.
There's one.
I have a couple for you. So nuclear power, that's right, nuclear power,
I got that one.
hydraulic fracking,
Hydraulic fracking. Okay.
and some of the more intense weed products.
Mm,
It's true, we do have limits on our weed.
yeah. It feels like a big deal.
It does.
And I know that we can repeal things at any time, but it just seems like there's a Rubicon.
I think that
Generally, when you go to the extent where you're banning something, you're looking at the public safety and public good. So does this mean that level?
I think that going backward. I mean, not to say that that's particularly on the table, but I'm just trying to think like, if you don't go forwards or if it just sort of languishes here. It's not. Yeah, like we're moving it, going backwards, going to a system where potentially it could fracture and like more, companies could be let in. I don't know if I'm more comfortable with this not being successful.
Well, I guess, I look at it too, it's what data will we gather that make us change our mind one way or the other next year? And so do we then go for another sunset? Extend the sunset for another year and then another year? And is that fair to the business?
No.
If they're operating at Vermont now at a loss. You're only gonna do that for so long. So.
Do we want to do the easy one or do we want to sit here in silence?
I was enjoying a silence for once.
Don't get too much from this.
Right.
Or you could just make a motion.
So, okay, why don't we leave it at this? Let's think about this for a little bit. But the second piece to the amendment is regulating merchant cash advances. It's not a ban. It's regulation. So they can still operate in Vermont if they go through DFR and become licensed. Everybody think about that.
I felt good.
People were scary.
I think it makes sense. It really is, it's a regulation light kind of thing. Mostly has to do with disclosure to make sure that the kinds of transactions that would come within the scope, the individual, and it's a smaller company. It's counterpart to the license lending personal line. And so the landscaper that kept bringing up, that's almost individual. That's almost an individual loan, but it's commercial. But it's very small, and it just seems to make sense to extend what we do with licensed lenders to this area that seems to be getting a little more prevalent. And without the disclosures, without some recourse to a regulatory entity that licenses the company, people get hurt. And doesn't say, again, it's regulation light. There's not a whole lot going on there, but at least it's a framework that someone who gets burned on something can go to someone to hear what recourse they have.
I support the bill. Sorry, I support the amendment.
Part of the amendment.
I support that part of the amendment, yes, this I can be sure of. I kind of question the need, but like I said, I mean, well, I don't, anyone can sell whatever product they want, it isn't hurting them. And a little bit of regulation, I think it's good, I think it'll prevent maybe some of the more nefarious companies that do this, like the 5 that called me today. So I'm 100% support of that one.
I'm in support.
Okay. Please. All in support of the merchant cash advance language, region and 02 for that. So let's take 10 minutes break, come back at 3:15 and then let's make a decision on what we're gonna do with crypto.